Lesson by Alphonse Daudet, who was a French novelist and short story writer. So, from the title itself, we know that this particular chapter is related to studies. First of all, let me ask you this question: why are we studying English? Has this language originated in India? So, as you know, the British conquered India and they enforced the English language for their administrative work. Similarly, in the Prussian War, France was defeated by Prussia. Prussia consisting of Germany, Poland, and parts of Austria. The speaking of French was banned and they enforced the German language for their administrative work. Here, the districts of Alsace and Lorraine were conquered by Prussia. The story is narrated from the point of view of a boy who is a school student called Franz. The story begins with Franz telling us that he was worried about his class that day. He was assigned a homework. He was assigned a homework for studying participles. Participle. A participle has qualities of a verb and an adjective. Example: a rolling stone gathers no moss. Here, rolling has qualities of a verb as well as an adjective which modifies the noun stone. But he never did that. He was attracted by the Prussian soldiers and the singing of birds. So he did not want to go to school after watching because watching the soldiers and the birds singing. We generally get distracted when we have hard work. Also, the author gives us an indication that the districts were already captured by Prussian soldiers. The narrator passed a town hall. Now, what is a town hall? Town hall is a venue where meetings are held with leaders to discuss important matters. There was a bulletin board. And what is a bulletin board? A bulletin board has the latest news and notices. Here the narrator clearly describes what happened in the many months before: the lost battles, the draft, the orders of the commanding officer, a short description of the battles, after which France was conquered. The blacksmith Vector called him to tell that there was plenty of time to go to school, though we know that France was getting late. Usually, when school started, there was a feeling of energy and liveliness. However, on that day it was silent everywhere. Here we get introduced to the name of his French language teacher, Monsieur Amal. Now, this is the French pronunciation. This is the French pronunciation, but we can also call him Mr. Amal. Monsieur is a French word for Mr. Franz was embarrassed to arrive late. He was afraid, but nothing happened. Franz noticed that Monsieur Hamel was wearing something different. Was wearing something different. Beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, and the little embroidered and the little black silk cap all embroidered that he never wore except on inspection and prize days. So he saw that this dress was worn by Mr. Amel on special occasions. Moreover, Franz became more surprised when he saw that the elders of the village were sitting on the back benches. The former mayor, postmaster, old Hosser, the former mayor, postmaster, and several others. Everybody looked sad. Next, something happened which is quite interesting. Mr. Hamel gave the shocking news that they have to study German instead of French. As I had told you earlier, after the Prussian War, French was banned in Alsace and Lorraine. The order came from Berlin on that day. Berlin, as you know, was the capital of Germany. So it was Mr. Hamel's last lesson on the French language. Franz regretted the fact that he did not study at home. He wanted to live up to his teacher's expectations on that last day. He realized that he had worn those special ceremonial clothes for that reason. He also realized why the elderly men had gathered on the back benches. It was to honor their teacher for 40 years of service. Mr. Amel called Franz to recite the participles, but Franz did not succeed. Franz was ashamed of this. Mr. Amal did not scold him. Instead, he made him realize he made him realize that he had won, that he had that procrastination. Monsieur Hamel did not scold him. Instead, he made Franz realize that procrastination does not help. Procrastination. Putting off your work till a later date, or wasting your time without doing your work. We see Mr. Amal arousing. Next, we see Mr. Amal arousing nationalist feelings by asking everyone present whether they could call themselves French, whether they could call themselves French when they did not know the language. Mr. Hamel also blames France's inability to recite on various reasons and includes himself also. Includes himself also. Mr. Hamel eulogizes the French language, describes it as very beautiful, and here too we get the nationalist fervor in his speech. He urges everyone not to forget their linguistic identity, as it would be a sign of defeat and submission. Their language will ultimately liberate them. Mr. Amel started to teach his lesson. Everyone listened to him in rapt attention. Franz was mesmerized. It was almost surreal or dreamlike for Franz to think that after 40 years, Mr. Amel had to. It was almost dreamlike for Franz to think that after 40 years, Mr. Amel had to leave his life and country. Even though he was agitated and downcast, Mr. Amel had the fortitude and was brave enough to evaluate everyone by listening to each lesson. Now, we come across this word primer quite often. We come across this word primer. Now, what is a primer? The primer is a text on a subject which has basic concepts. At the end, we see that the people gathered there became emotional. In the middle of all this, suddenly there was a cacophony of the church clock striking 12, the angelus or the bell calling to prayer, and the trumpets of the Prussian soldiers returning after a drill, that is, practicing something related to military. Mr. Amel tried to address the gathering. He was overwhelmed and became choked with emotion. Then he concluded his class by writing the words Vive la France on the board which means long live France, and finally gestured to the students to disperse. With this, we come to the end of our lesson. I hope you liked it. Thank you.